In the far eastern wing of the crumbling archives of the Benedictine monastery at Vaux-le-Vicomte, its key long lost, its purpose forgotten by all but the shadows, within it buried beneath codices of heresy and famine rests, a single vellum-bound journal, burned around the edges, as if the fire once tried to consume its truth and failed. It bears no title, only a sigil, a crowned heart pierced by an iron rod. The first page, brittle and trembling with time, begins not with a name, but with a scream. She did not weep when they begged. She watched the skin slough from their bodies like fruit boiled too long. She studied it, as if it were poetry unraveling. This, dear listener, is the only surviving account of Queen Alinara of Varnham, the monarch scholars insist never existed, whose name has been stricken from every official chronicle and whose face, some say, was never once captured in paint, only whispered in prayers to keep her away. It begins in the year of the Bleeding Comet, 1478. The kingdom of Varnham, nestled in the mist-choked valleys between Livonia and the pagan forests of the Rus, was a land unmarked by maps and ignored by empires. They said the mountains moved in that place, and the rivers steamed even in frost. But it was not the land that bred darkness. It was the bloodline. Alinar was not born to rule. She was born of Scandla, daughter of Queen Sigrid, the mad and a huntsman whose name no one dared speak aloud. It was said the queen conceived her during a 3-month silence, when not a word left her lips, and upon birth, Alina did not cry. She simply stared, eyes wide, black as split coal, and still. From her infancy, she was feared. Nannies abandoned her cradle by dawn. Cats refused to enter her chamber. Even the stone floors grew cold beneath her steps, as if the earth itself recoiled. By 13, she had mastered 5 languages. By 15, she had flayed her first man Eliva, an invading emissary who dared call her lesser heir before the court. No record of punishment exists, only an addendum in the Chancellor's register. Let none speak ill of the heir, lest the skin be taught humility. When Queen Sigrid choked on her own tongue during supper, none dared investigate. And so Alinar, at 17, took the throne beneath a blood moon, wrapped in a funeral veil and a robe stitched from the hair of her mother's ladies. She reigned not by decree, but by desire feral, unpredictable, and steeped in ritual. She called herself Bride of Steam. Her castle, once a monastic fortress, was transformed. Cisterns were carved into the floors. Pipes ran through the walls. Every chamber contained a hidden valve. The royal baths were expanded tenfold, fed by natural geysers beneath the foundations. And it was there, in the balneary halls beneath the throne room, that she received her lovers. They were always beautiful, always foreign, and always disappeared by morning. At first, the court whispered of exile, of shame, of games played too cruelly. But the dreams began shared dreams, among servants and knights and noble daughters alike. Dreams of hissing steam, of flesh bubbling in silence, of eyes wide with the betrayal of love, and the scent, that coppery perfume of boiled marrow that clung to the curtains long after the dawn winds came. Yet no one spoke, not because they feared death, but because they feared they might enjoy it. For Alinar was intoxicating. Her voice wove through minds like smoke. Her presence filled the halls like incense. She would speak of poetry while drawing symbols in blood. She would gift roses that never wilted, though their thorns dripped crimson. The people adored her, not out of love but a terrible, holy awe. And when the Bishop of Hildestadt came to denounce her rites, he emerged 2 days later, pale and trembling, declaring her God's second flood, come to cleanse the wrath of men. He took his vows of silence soon after. His tongue was later found in the gardens, coiled around a rose vine. The council, of course, knew. They kept ledgers. Dozens of namesmen of status, generals, envoys, poets all vanished, and the pattern was clear. Alinar never took a man from her court, only outsiders, only those who would not be missed for long. Some called it justice, others sacrifice. But one name in those ledgers bears an ink darker than the rest. Sebastian of Thornwall, a man with no title, no land, only a face sculpted by flame and the voice of a summer storm. And when he came, the queen smiled for the first time. Sebastian of Thornwall arrived not with a procession, but on foot, soaked in the silver rain of a Varnham dusk. The guards at the iron gate hesitated, for no one came unannounced, and fewer still survived it, but The queen had seen him in her mirror 2 nights before, naked, wet with salt water, and smiling like he had returned from a place no one ever escapes. "Let him through," she whispered, before he even knocked. Sebastian was not a man who should have drawn her attention. He had no armor, no courtly manner, no lineage to recommend him. He spoke little. He carried no weapon. But there was something in the way he stood beneath the columns of the throne, room defiant and calm, like a wolf returned to the den of its mother. He told no lies. That was the first miracle. When asked where he came from, he said, "Nowhere, but I passed through many hells to get here." When asked why he sought audience with the queen, he replied, "I didn't. She called me." And when asked what he brought as tribute, he removed a small velvet pouch from beneath his shirt and poured its contents into his palm. 5 teeth, human, polished, engraved with runes, in a language even Eleanor did not recognize. He said nothing more, and neither did she. That night he dined at her left hand. The court was disturbed, though none spoke it aloud. The queen, who once flayed a man for mispronouncing her name, now sat still and quiet, watching Sebastian eat. Her fingers never strayed from her wine, her breath never quickened, and yet something had changed. In the weeks that followed, he did not leave the palace. He wandered its steaming corridors, as though they were forests he had known in dreams. He asked no questions, he took nothing, and most unsettling of all, he did not pursue her. That, perhaps, is what drew her nearer, for Elena was accustomed to conquest. 2 men who fell to their knees with lips trembling and eyes pleading. 2 voices that cracked as they swore they'd die for her. But Sebastian did none of this. He sat, and he listened. He listened when she recited lines of varnish verse, lost to history. He listened when she described the texture of flame. He listened when she spoke of the first man she ever boiled, how he sang for her as he burned. Most men would flinch. He only smiled, and slowly something dangerous began to take root, not desire, but reverence. She began to believe he was like her, that perhaps she had found the echo of her own cruelty in the eyes of another. The palace changed, subtly. The servants whispered less, the steam grew thicker, the baths grew hotter, and for the first time, Elena dismissed her ladies-in-waiting before evening. She walked the halls alone. They shared meals, then dreams, then silences too long to be anything but sacred. She no longer summoned lovers. No screams rose from the balcony. No blood seeped beneath the iron doors. The boiling tubs, they said, grew cold. The council grew restless. Whispers turned to murmurs. The kingdom, in its own twisted way, had grown accustomed to the queen's atrocities. They had made sense of them, cloaked them in myth, explained them as divine wrath. But love, real love, that was far more dangerous. For love softens the hand. It invites betrayal. And worse, Lord Earnhard, head of the Privy Circle, began collecting evidence. He bribed the palace steward. He examined the piping that led from the queen's quarters to the vaults below. He found, in the residue of the old cauldrons, something strange. Flower petals, dozens of them, boiled with bone. They feared Sebastian had bewitched her, but no one dared act. Not yet, because every day the queen smiled, and every night the steam still hissed through the walls like breath from some great unseen beast, until the night of the eclipse. It came without warning, a black disk over the sun, heavy as judgment. The birds fell silent, the dogs wailed, and Elena, draped in silks of deep garnet, led Sebastian by hand down into the deepest vaults of the palace. Only one servant was brave or foolish enough to follow. Her name was Margit, a mute kitchen girl who had grown up in the palace since the time of Queen C. She had no tongue, but she had eyes, and on that night they saw more than they ever should have. The queen and her lover descended not to the boiling chambers, but to the room behind them, the one with no doors, only firelight through cracks in the stone. Margit pressed her face to the wall and watched through a chink where rats once chewed through the lime. What she saw was this: a bed of ash, a circle of knives, a mirror filled with smoke, and the queen, on her knees, whispering to it. Sebastian stood behind her, arms crossed, his chest painted with what looked like blood or wine. He said nothing. The queen began to chant in tongues older than fire. The mirror shimmered, and from it something emerged, not a shape, but a sound, a low, rising chorus of agony, like all the voices of the men she had boiled were singing from beneath the earth. She smiled, and in that moment Margit understood the truth. Alina was not simply killing her lovers, she was offering them, feeding something beneath the stone. And Sebastian, he had not come to stop her. He had come to open the gate wider. Margit fled before the ritual ended. She ran barefoot, bleeding from the eyes, back through the steaming corridors. She never spoke a word, for she could not, but she carved a message into the chapel wall that night, before hanging herself from the bell rope. Only 4 words: "He is not hers." 3 days after Margit's death, the palace bells rang of their own accord. No wind stirred them, no hand touched the ropes. They screamed across the valley with the pitch of mourning, long, slow, and wrong, as if the bronze itself remembered something too dreadful to keep quiet. In the high gallery, where portraits of forgotten monarchs lined the walls in faded gold leaf, the council assembled, not by summons, but by instinct, for the palace had grown colder, though the geysers still hissed. The scent of ash clung to every tapestry. The queen no longer walked among them. She and Sebastian had vanished behind the veil gate. The sealed arch deep beneath the palace, carved with a warning in iron script: "Let not the mouth feed what the hand cannot hold." No one alive remembered what lay beyond it, only that the gate had not been opened since the days when wolves wore crowns and men bathed in pitch to ward off spirits. But now the queen and her strange consort passed freely into it, sometimes for days, emerging pale and shivering, eyes wide with knowledge that no scripture dared hold. The courtiers feared the worst, that she was no longer fully of this world. Lord Earnhard convened the silent circle, 7 men who had once vowed never to speak again unless the kingdom itself stood on the brink. That night their voices returned, and with them came a plan. Sebastian had to die, not for justice, not for revenge, but because he had changed her. Alina's darkness had been predictable, ordered, rooted in ritual. It could be studied, tracked, contained like fire in a hearth. But with Sebastian, the pattern had broken. The baths had grown quiet, yes, but the rituals had deepened, more precise, more ancient, and the queen's hunger had become ... devotional. So the circle prepared the only poison known to survive her blood, a tincture, a frost-root and blind leaf, gathered from a forest that no longer existed, dipped in gold, hidden in the tip of a wine needle. But it would not be Earnhard who delivered it. They chose Lady highborn, untouchable, her veins filled with the blood of 3 kings. She had once been promised to the queen's cousin before he vanished, last seen walking into the steam with roses in his hands. Her grief had turned to hatred long ago, but her voice had always remained calm. She would host a feast, not in the great hall, but in the old gallery, beneath the fresco of the God with 2 faces, where the queen had not walked since her mother's death. It was a risk, but Alina came. She entered veiled in black lace, lips like painted garnets, fingers dripping with rubies too deep to be mere stones. And Sebastian followed close behind her, barefoot, clad in white linen, as if he had just risen from baptism. The courtiers bowed, but their eyes stayed low. No one dared meet her gaze. Even the hounds kept silent. Lady Corintha rose, welcomed them, poured wine laced with the golden venom. She spoke of rebirth, of forgiveness, of history healed by communion. And for a moment, just one moment, the queen smiled in a way none had seen before. She was grateful. The glasses were lifted, the wine touched lips, but only one man drank, Sebastian, and nothing happened. No choking, no seizing of the limbs. He swallowed the poison like it was water from a sacred spring. Then he looked at Corintha and said, "This wine has no memory." She paled. The queen rose, and the room fell to silence. "Do you think," Alina whispered, voice like silk pulled through a wound, "that I would let you harm the first man who ever saw me and did not kneel?" Sebastian placed his hand on her shoulder, and for the first time she trembled. Then he turned to the table. His voice rose not loud, but deep, resonant, like bells beneath water. "You have grown fat on her cruelty. You have worn her sins like jewelry. You loved the boiling. You wrote songs about the steam. And now you fear her softness more than her wrath. That is why none of you will survive." With that, he raised his hand, and the gallery door slammed shut. The pipes groaned, the walls exhaled, and from the cracks in the floor, the steam began to rise, not white, but red. The feast became a furnace. The courtiers screamed, but the sound vanished into the hissing fog. Skin blistered, eyes boiled in sock. The wine turned to blood, the silver to ash. Lady Corintha, last to fall, tried to crawl toward the queen. Her fingers left trails of molten flesh. She reached Elena's feet and wept not from pain, but from understanding. "I see now," she gasped. "You were always the lesser evil." The queen bent low, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "No, dear, I was merely the quieter one." By dawn, the old gallery was gone, burned to its bones. No ash remained, only a scorched mural. Half survived the god with two faces now weeping, and from that day on, no one saw Sebastian again. But his shadow remained. He no longer walked the halls, but the steam remembered him. Sometimes, in the deepest hours, it shaped itself into a man's barefoot, arms outstretched, eyes like burning coals. And the queen, once feared as a goddess of agony, began to fade. She still ruled, still spoke, still wore the crown, but her cruelty no longer belonged to her alone. It had become a shared gospel, and she, its high priestess. They say the land began to change. It was slow at first. Trees near the palace turned brittle, bleeding sap like clotted blood. Birds no longer nested near the spires. The soil soured, and the wells grew warm. Even the moon seemed to hesitate over Varnum, as if the sky itself no longer wished to cast light upon what grew within those steaming halls. And at the center of it, all Quinola changed, yet unchanged. Her beauty remained, but it no longer seduced. It warned. Her voice still soothed, but with an echo like something deeper beneath her words was speaking to. Her eyes now bore a gleam not of power, but of hunger starved too long. She stopped speaking of Sebastian, never once spoke his name again, but every night she bathed in the old chamber, alone, surrounded by roses that never died. Servants left them outside the iron doors, and in the morning the petals were gone. Only thorns remained. The kingdom continued. On paper at least. Foreign dignitaries came less often, and those who did were never seen again. Letters arrived unopened. Trade faltered. The northern passes froze over. Still, none rose against her. No rebellion stirred, for something in the people's hearts had calcified. They had seen too much, lost too many, and worst of all, they remembered how she had once smiled when she was in love, and what followed that. But beyond the palace, in the ruins of the old monastery buried beneath Varnum's foundation, someone else remembered. His name was Father Yarrick, the last of the old order, blind since birth, yet keeper of secrets written in braille and blood. He had served 3 kings before Lynn, had baptized her as a child, had once anointed her mother with oil made from myrrh and bone, and he had waited. Each night he walked the chapel's perimeter, reciting verses not in Latin, but in the root tongue, the language of clay and fire, long buried by time but never by truth. He knew Sebastian not by face, but by name, a name not spoken in the book of hours, but in the chronicle of the hollow crown, a forbidden tome bound in flayed calfskin, hidden beneath the altar where sunlight never touched. It told of the Soromira relic said to reflect, not the face, but the soul's deepest wish, and of a being, half man, half memory, who walked between steam and spirit, drawn to queens who longed not for love but worship. It told of heralds, not demons, not angels, but amplifiers, vessels of forgotten will. They offered nothing freely. They answered the cries beneath the Christ, the prayers whispered, while others screamed. Sebastian was one, and Alina had summoned him, not with incantation, not with sacrifice, but with longing. The chronicle was clear. Where a heart hungers past cruelty, past pleasure, past flesh, there shall the herald come, and what he leaves behind shall be a throne wrapped in silence and skin. Father Yarrick, though blind, wept, for he had once held her as an infant, had felt her heart beat, too slow for a child, had whispered blessings over her brow. He knew what had to be done, but Varnum could not be saved, not all at once. So he wrote a final letter, scratched with ink made of soot and snowmalt, sealed in beeswax, and buried in the mouth of a dead hounder, spell of ancient binding, meant to keep the truth hidden until the kingdom no longer remembered how to be afraid. But even spells erode. In the palace, Alina dreamed. She saw Sebastian, naked beneath a tree of smoke, holding a rose carved from bone. He beckoned. She stepped forward, and the ground cracked with heat. Beneath her feet, she heard the chorus again, the men she had loved and destroyed, not screaming, but singing, singing of mercy, of endings. She awoke in tears, not from sorrow, but from knowing the dream was not hers, it was his. The next day, She ordered the castle, chapel sealed, the priests dismissed, the altars shattered. She claimed holiness was no longer needed, that Varnim was now its own sanctuary, that no god could sit above a queen who had learned to feed the silence itself. She declared a new feast day, the day of unmooring, no prayers, no offerings, only stillness, the entire city to fall silent from dawn to dusk. No voices, no footsteps, no sound, as if to remind the world that before breath there had only ever been steam. And it was during that silence that something awoke. Beneath the palace, in the pipes long thought dry, the hissing began anew, not the usual breath of heated stone but a voice. It spoke in rhythm, in echo, and the servants, though forbidden to utter a sound, dropped their trays, fell to their knees, and covered their ears. For the voice did not speak to their ears. It spoke to the bones, and every word said the same thing. She is no longer the queen. The day after the feast of unmooring, the queen did not rise from her bed. No orders were issued, no meals prepared. The iron doors of her chamber, once hissing with heat, remained sealed and still. Hours passed, then days. The sun rose and fell over the steaming spires of Varnum, but no one saw her, and the palace held its breath. It was the steward, old Jorik, with the bent spine and trembling hands, who first broke the silence, not from courage, but from hunger. The kitchens had ceased to cook, and the wine cellars no longer answered his knocks, so he approached the queen's chambers alone, candles shaking in his grip, a tray of untouched bread held like an offering to a god long buried. The door opened before he knocked. No one stood behind it, no voice called him in, but the air inside was thick-scented not with blood or ash, but roses. Not fresh roses, but dried ones. Roses left in cellars for years, forgotten, until the petals darkened to the color of dried lungs. He stepped inside. The bed was untouched, the silk sheets still drawn, and in the center of the room, rising like a black tooth from the marble, stood the throne, but not the one carved of pine and pearl. This throne was new, grown, not built. Its surface was smooth and wet, as if it had once been flesh. Its armrests were made of bone but not animal, human, pale and gleaming, as if scrubbed clean by centuries of tears. And on the throne sat a crown, not of gold, not of iron, but of steam. It hovered, weightless, hissing softly, spinning in place above the seat like the eye of a storm, and within it, at its center, something darker than shadow, pulsed like a sleeping heart. Jorik turned to run, but the door had closed. The air thickened, the candle guttered out, and from the walls came a sound not of pipes or gears but breathing, slow, wet, rhythmic, not one breath, but many, dozens, hundreds, as if the very walls of the queen's chambers were alive, exhaling the memory of every man who had ever died for her. Jorik dropped the tray, bread rolled into the steam, and as he backed away, he saw it etched into the marble beneath the throne, a sigil, not carved, branded, burned so deep that the stone itself blistered, the crowned heart, pierced by the iron rod, the mark last seen on a scorched journal buried in the monastery archives. Jorik screamed, but his scream made no sound, because the palace no longer allowed it. Outside, the city began to rot, the river turned black, the cattle refused to eat, the mothers miscarried in silence, and those who tried to flee found the roads gone. The fog rose higher than the bell towers, and behind every curtain someone could feel at that presence, watching, breathing, waiting. Then came the mass dream. It arrived like a plague, spreading across the kingdom in a single night. Men, women, children all shared it, the same vision, the same voice. They stood in a room of white stone, filled with steam, and at its center, a figure sat on the throne of bone and rose ash. She had no face, only the crown of vapor above her, and she spoke, not in words, but in heat. She offered a question. "Do you still wish to serve me?" Some said yes, and they never woke again. Others said no, and awoke screaming, blood pouring from their ears, their tongues blackened and curled. By morning, half the city was dead, and still no one rebelled, because rebellion was for tyrants of flesh. This was something else, a queen no longer bound by crown or blood or body, a queen of heat, of echo, of memory distilled in marrow, a queen who no longer needed to boil her lovers, because she had become the steam itself. The final decree came not by voice, but by silence. An edict carved into every stone wall of Varnum overnight. No hammer, no chisel, just there etched in the breath of something older than kings. It read, "Love was the first offering. You will bring the rest." It would have remained legend whispers in scorched towns, the smoke song of wandering madmen if, not for one man, a scholar, an unbeliever, and a fool. His name was Elias Bram. He arrived in Varnum 200 years too late, dressed in the linen of the Royal Antiquarian Society, carrying more arrogance than coin. He had heard only fragments, rumors of a vanished city, a cursed queen, a valley no map dared name. Perfect fodder, he thought, for his next publication, a thrilling Gothic farce. But the moment his carriage crossed the Deadwood Bridge into the valley, the horses stopped breathing. Not panic, not illness. They simply lay down and exhaled, as if something had whispered to them that their service was no longer required. He continued on foot. The forest swallowed sound. Even his boots, crunching over frost and bone, made no echo. The mist was so dense, it hung like curtains, parting only when he passed. And at the center of it all, like a cyst in the flesh of time, stood the ruins, but ruins only in name. The palace still stood, blackened, towering, steam still rising in faint trails from the cracks in the earth. The spires twisted toward the heavens like claws, and above them, hanging motionless, was the crowned heart sigil, not a banner, but a shadow burnt into the very clouds. Bram wrote furiously in his journal, his fingers blue with cold. He documented each step, each stone. He did not believe, of course, not truly. He chalked the silence up to pressure shifts. The steam, geothermal, the atmosphere, folklore and fear. But then he found the chapel, buried beneath rubble and time, its doors still sealed. He pried them open with an iron bar and descended, coughing, eyes watering. At the center of the chapel was an altar, blackened wood, and upon it a single book, bound in cracked leather. No title, only that same mark burned into its cover. He opened it. The pages were soft, not paper, skin, written in a script that moved when he stared too long, reshaping itself into languages he had never learned but understood. And the moment he read the first line, the steam behind him shifted. It spoke, not aloud, not in his ears, but in the marrow of his spine. You do not believe. But belief is not the threshold. Hunger is. Bram turned to flee, but the door had vanished. There were no torches, no flame, only the glow of the book in his hand, and the heat rising from the altar, growing stronger, heavier. The voice came again. She waits, still seated, still listening. He dropped the book and ran, blind in the dark. He scraped his hands raw against stone and glass. He climbed without seeing, and when at last he burst into the open air, he collapsed. He awoke in a hospice 3 weeks later. They found him half dead outside the valley, eyes bloodshot, hair white, voice gone. His journal was clutched in his handpages, stuck together with wax, some melted, some rewritten by a hand that was not his. The nurses said he never slept. He only whispered in his dreams, and those whispers all began the same way. She is still warm. When he could speak again, he begged the society to seal the records, to burn his field notes. He gave false coordinates, claimed the valley had flooded, swore the palace was lost. But of course, not everyone believed him. Curiosity breeds faster than truth. In the decades that followed, 5 expeditions were sent to Varnum. None returned. Not fully. One man came back without eyes, claimed he had torn them out to stop the steam from reflecting. One woman returned with her veins filled with hot salt water. She lived 4 more days, then turned to vapor. The last attempt ended with a message carved into the side of a horse. She no longer needs doors, only names. Elias Bram died in a sanatorium, choking on rose petals that had never entered his room, but his journal survived. And you, listener, may wonder, if all of this is hidden, buried, erased, how do I know? Because I, too, was once there, not as a scholar, not as a priest, but as a boy. My father served the last family to flee the valley before the fog thickened for good. He took me through the ruins, said I needed to see where silence was born. We never reached the gates, but we heard the voice. Not a whisper, not a scream. It said my name, and since that day, I have not dreamed of anything else. The Queen no longer rules Varnum. She is Varnum. She is the heat beneath the stones, the breath in old pipes, the echo between screams. She no longer boils her lovers alive. She waits for them to walk willingly into her. And they do. They always do. They say the queen appears only to those who are ready to serve, not the brave, not the pure, but those who carry the right kind of wound, deep, festering, unspoken, the sort of wound that opens not from violence, but from love withheld for too long. She does not call them. They simply find themselves walking into valleys that no longer have names, through forests where no birds sing, across bridges that rot after each crossing. And when they arrive, the palace is always there where the centuries have passed or none at all. Time bends around her like smoke around glass. Her kingdom no longer honors history. It honors only hunger. We know this because of the children. Yes, children. Every 30 years, give or take a breath, a child is born with a mark beneath the left shoulder, a pale, crown-shaped scar. Some say it looks like a burn. Others say it pulses under moonlight. These children grow different, too quiet, too clever, drawn to heat, to stillness, to mirrors. They are not hers, but they remember her. And when they reach their 16th year, they disappear. Sometimes from locked rooms, sometimes from moving trains, sometimes they are there one moment and gone the next, leaving only steam where they stood. Governments ignore the pattern. Churches explain it away. But the archivists, the secret keepers of forgotten bloodlines, have mapped it. Every child bore a distant trace of Varnum in their veins, and every one of them vanished during the spring. Thaw in, the earth exhales, and the pipes beneath the ruined palace grow warm again. That is when the queen awakens, not to rule, but to receive. They say the throne no longer needs a body to sit upon it. It remembers, and it speaks. One such child was Leora Tamsin, born in Wales in 1923. She never spoke until age 8. Then, overnight, she began reciting lines in a language no scholar could name. Her eyes bled when she prayed. She refused to enter churches, saying the walls sang too loud. At 16, she walked into the sea, her body washed ashore. 3 days later, dry and burnt, but etched with rose stems carved from scar to scar, spiraling across her back. On the base of her spine was a new mark, a throne with no queen. That was the first sign. The second came during the Black Summer of 53, when 9 entire villages in the Carpathians vanished beneath the mist. No bodies, no blood, only cracked stone and a single surviving child, found weeping in a chapel, holding a rose made of bone. She could not speak, but she wrote one sentence in chalk across the chapel floor before she, too, disappeared. She wants her name back, because, dear listener, that is what this story has always been about. Not the killings, not the boiling, not the throne, but the name. The one they erased from the histories, the one no herald dares utter, the one bound in flesh and fire and buried beneath centuries of salt. She is not Queen Eleanor anymore. That was a name for a girl, a daughter, a shadow of a dying lineage. Now she is something older. She is the bride of steam, the mother of stillness, the throat of the mirror, and her true name is not spoken in words. It is spoken in silence. It is whispered when a lover betrays you, when a prayer goes unanswered, when you scream into the bathwater and no one hears. It is in that moment when the heat coils around your grief that she comes, and all she asks is that you bring her something warm, something beloved, something alive. So the rituals continue, hidden, modernized, made palatable to the age. We dress them up as disappearances, as accidents, as suicides. But the truth is older. We still feed her, because we remember her, and because, perhaps, in some deep and awful way, we still love her. There is a question that haunts the last pages of any story like this. Why did no one stop her? Why did no brave knight ride into the valley, sword drawn, to slay the witch? Why did no army descend upon her gates, no priest light the fires of exorcism? Why did they let her reign, let her boil, let her love and destroy and rise again? The answer is as quiet as the breath before drowning, because no one wanted to. Not truly. You see, Queen Alenarif, that name still fits off at something no kingdom, no god, no righteous man ever could. She offered understanding, not forgiveness, not salvation, but a mirror held up to the soul's darkest wish, to be seen in the moment of greatest cruelty or longing or despair and not turned away. She did not demand purity, only honesty. The lover she boiled died smiling, some say because in her eyes They saw a reflection of what they had always feared, that they were monsters, too, and in death she gave them permission. The steam did not judge, it embraced. Even now, her influence lingers not just in Varnum, not just in the cursed lines of children born with strange scars, but in the corners of cities where the heat never shuts off, in the alleys behind bathhouses, in the hiss of old radiators, in the mirror fog that never fades. She lives where no history book would dare place her. She reigns in absence, in silence, in want. The last confirmed sighting, if one dares use such a word, was in 1987, beneath the city of Brela, where the subway tunnel collapsed during excavation. 3 workers went missing. One emerged days later, covered in third-degree burns, though no fire had touched the ground. He died whispering. She smiled at me, and the air melted. And since then, no one has gone looking again. But perhaps you've felt her, haven't you? In the bath, alone, when the water is too hot. But you stay anyway, when the steam fogs the mirror, and you see a shape behind you but turn, and nothing's there. When you hear a soft breath not your own, and hold perfectly still. That is how she moves now. Not through force, but through invitation. You do not summon her. You remember her. You whisper her stories aloud, just like this one, in dark rooms, with the lights low, with no one else home, and she listens. She is always listening. So let this story end not with a warning, nor with a curse. Let it end with a choice. Because if you are still here, still listening, still thinking of her, then you, too, have felt the warmth in your chest that isn't yours. And should you ever feel too alone, too unseen, should you ever wish to be held by something that does not ask you to change, simply draw the crown in the condensation on your mirror, just once. She will come, and you will boil beautifully.